What happened when an undercover CEO traded his blazer for a grass-stained uniform and discovered the truth hiding behind a manicured fairway? Welcome, brilliant and insightful viewers. You always know how to pick a powerful story. Today's tale goes far beyond bunkers and birdies. Join us as we follow Elliot Walker, a golf club CEO who goes undercover as a groundskeeper to investigate troubling reports of mistreatment. What he uncovers is a story of exhaustion, quiet resilience, and the courage to change a broken system. Trust us, this is one round you'll want to stick around for. Let's tee off. Elliot Granger sat in his sleek air-conditioned office overlooking the lush hills of Greenvale Pines Golf and Country Club, but his mind wasn't on the perfectly manicured greens. Instead, it was locked onto a troubling report glowing on his laptop screen. At a glance, the numbers seemed fine: steady membership renewals, decent profits, no glaring red flags. But buried beneath the surface were complaints that couldn't be ignored. One in particular struck him like a punch to the gut. A delivery driver had collapsed from heat exhaustion just outside the maintenance building, and staff allegedly stood by, claiming he was faking it. That wasn't the club Elliot's late father had built, a place meant to honor hard work, community, and dignity. What had gone so wrong? As he dug deeper, Elliot uncovered more: repeated staff turnover, anonymous comments about unsafe working conditions, favoritism in scheduling, broken equipment, and even reports of docked pay for minor errors. The operations manager's name, Paul Kendrick, kept coming up, often mentioned alongside complaints of verbal abuse and retaliatory write-ups. Elliot realized something horrifying. Greenvale Pines looked pristine to guests, but beneath the surface, the people who made it all possible were being run into the ground. For years, Elliot had kept a respectful distance from daily operations, trusting his managers and department heads to uphold the club's values. But that trust was clearly misplaced. Sitting in silence, he glanced at the framed photo of his father and clenched his jaw. If his employees were being mistreated, if corners were being cut in the name of profits, then Elliot bore responsibility for turning a blind eye. It wasn't enough to fix this from a boardroom. He had to see it for himself, unfiltered, unannounced, and undercover. He scribbled 2 words on a yellow notepad: "Go in." The only way to fix Greenvale Pines was to walk its fairways in the worn-out boots of the people holding it together. Elliot spent the weekend transforming from country club executive to anonymous grounds crew worker. Gone were his pressed polos and tailored khakis, replaced with sun-faded cargo pants, a frayed maintenance shirt, and steel-toe boots scuffed just enough to look worn, not staged. He buzzed his neatly combed hair short and let his usually clean-shaven face grow into a patchy, rugged beard. To complete the look, he wore a sweat-stained cap pulled low and thick sunglasses that obscured his sharp, familiar eyes. He'd be known as Eli Gray, a temp laborer recently relocated from out of state, with experience in landscaping and a quiet, keep-your-head-down attitude. A friend in HR, discreetly in on the plan, inserted him into the seasonal roster under a false name. No digital records tied him back to Elliot Granger, the heir to Greenvale Pines. The hiring process was alarmingly simple: a rushed phone call from an assistant turf manager, a brief mention of early hours and heat, followed by "Can you start Monday?" No background check, no formal onboarding, no questions, just a body to fill a role. That was the first red flag. Elliot packed a duffel bag with gloves, sunscreen, and a notebook he intended to fill. He left his Rolex and wedding ring in his desk drawer, along with the badge that opened the executive wing of the clubhouse. For the first time in years, he wouldn't be Mr. Granger. He'd be just another laborer, weed-whacking, raking bunkers, and pushing a mower through the foggy morning mist. He wasn't going to be noticed. He was going in to listen, and if the whispers he'd read were true, then under the perfect green veneer of Greenvale Pines lay a rot no amount of turf seed could cover. Elliot, now Eli Gray, arrived at Greenvale Pines Golf Club before sunrise, the air still heavy with dew and the chirp of early morning birdsong breaking the silence. From the front gate, the grounds looked immaculate, with emerald fairways stretching into the distance and sand traps raked to perfection. But behind the clubhouse, where the maintenance crew clocked in through a rusted side door, the illusion fractured. The locker room was cramped and smelled faintly of oil and mildew. A faded sign above the sink read, "No complaints, just work." A wiry man with grease-streaked hands and a sour expression waved him over. "You the new guy, Ilya?" Elliot nodded. "Good, we're short again. You're on bunker duty. Stay out of the player's line of sight, and if the head groundskeeper comes around, keep your mouth shut." His name tag read. Thrown directly into the rhythm of the crew, Elliot raked sand traps with blistering speed under the rising sun, feeling the ache build in his shoulders. The work was backbreaking, and the expectations were worse. No breaks, no chatter, no questions. He quickly noticed that veteran workers moved with practiced efficiency, not from pride, but fear. One young worker, Matteo, received a sharp rebuke for taking a sip of water outside of the scheduled break time. "You thirsty or lazy?" Rick barked. Between shoveling sand and trimming brush, Elliot started to see the hierarchy. Senior staff barked orders without lifting a finger, while the younger or seasonal workers bore the brunt of the labor. A few dared to shoot Elliot tired, suspicious glances, likely unsure whether he was one of them or another stooge sent to monitor their performance. By the time his first shift ended, Elliot was drenched in sweat, his palms blistered, and his mind racing. The cracks in Greenvale Pine's polished surface weren't just visible, they were widening. It happened just after the lunch rush, when the sun was highest and the heat off the fairways radiated like an oven. Elliot was clearing debris near hole 7 when he spotted a commotion near the maintenance cart bay. Ray, an older groundskeeper with salt and pepper stubble and a slight limp, was staggering near the gravel path, his face pale and drenched in sweat. Then, without a word, his knees buckled and he collapsed onto the dirt. Elliot sprinted over, dropping his rake mid-stride. "Ray, can you hear me?" he called, kneeling beside the man whose breathing was shallow and erratic. A few feet away, other workers froze, glancing nervously at one another, unsure whether to step in. Rick, standing on the porch of the tool shed with a clipboard in hand, scoffed. "He's faking it. Ray always pulls something when it's hot, just trying to get out of work." Elliot clenched his jaw. Someone called an ambulance, now. Silence followed. Then Matteo, the youngest on the crew, hesitantly pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his hands visibly shaking. Rick rolled his eyes. "This is exactly why we don't baby people. You give them an inch, they'll lie down in a sand trap next." Elliot ignored him, staying by Ray's side until paramedics arrived. The EMTs confirmed what Elliot suspected: heat stroke, likely worsened by dehydration and overexertion. As Ray was loaded into the ambulance, still semi-conscious, Elliot turned to Rick. "You didn't even check on him." Rick shrugged. "I've got a course to run. One guy down doesn't stop the day." That sentence burned in Elliot's mind. Ray wasn't just a casualty of heat. He was a casualty of a system that treated its workers like machinery. As the cart doors closed, Elliot knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about one man collapsing. It was about an entire culture ready to fall right behind him. In the days following Ray's collapse, Elliot, still undercover as Eli Marsh, began quietly observing every layer of the club's operations. Beneath the manicured greens and pristine fairways, he uncovered a system built on silent exhaustion. Groundskeepers like Matteo and Greg were regularly scheduled for double shifts with no overtime, while Rick berated them for taking too long between holes. Elliot saw how older workers were assigned the most grueling physical tasks, like hauling irrigation equipment or clearing brush from steep embankments, while newer hires, especially those favored by Rick, were given lighter, more visible duties to look busy for management walkthroughs. The favoritism was blatant, but no one dared speak up. When a worker named Tina asked for new gloves after hers tore at the seam, Rick barked, "If your hands hurt, use your mouth less." Everyone laughed, but Tina's expression didn't change. Beyond mistreatment, safety was a joke. Broken sprinklers leaked water into electrical equipment. Weed trimmers with frayed cords were patched with duct tape. When Elliot raised a concern about a cracked bridge plank near hole 14, Rick dismissed it with a wave. If no one's fallen through yet, it's not a priority. Even more disturbing, there were whispered stories, like how Marco, a former worker, had injured his back hauling fertilizer and was quietly pushed off the schedule until he stopped showing up. No formal reports, no medical support, just erased. What struck Elliot most, though, was how resigned everyone had become. It wasn't just fear that kept them silent. It was the belief that nothing would change. They had learned to work around danger, tiptoe around Rick's temper, and laugh off pain because complaining meant losing hours. Elliot took notes after every shift, documenting patterns, quotes, and behavior. The deeper he looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a problem, it was a culture. And unless someone stepped in, it would keep grinding people down until there was nothing left but empty smiles and worn-out bodies. It all came to a head on a sweltering Saturday afternoon when the course was packed with high-paying members and the maintenance crew was stretched thin. Elliot was working alongside Mateo near the 10th green, raking debris after a storm the night before. The two had barely spoken when a shout echoed from across the course. A member, red-faced, golfing in designer polos, was pointing furiously at his golf cart which had stalled near the path. "Unbelievable! I pay top dollar and this is the garbage you give me," he bellowed. Rick arrived seconds later, panting, and offered apologies laced with forced charm. But when the member demanded someone be fired over the malfunction, Rick didn't hesitate. "I warned Eli yesterday to check the carts. He clearly didn't." Elliot froze. That was a lie. He hadn't even been assigned cart maintenance. "That's not true," he said evenly, stepping forward. Rick's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? I was told to work greens. I never touched the carts." Rick's voice turned venomous. "So now you're calling me a liar?" He turned to the member. "You see what I deal with. No respect." The member scoffed, grabbed his bag, and stormed off. Back at the shed, Rick pulled Elliot aside, fuming. "You just cost us a VIP renewal," he growled. "Pack your crap and go." Before Elliot could respond, Cam, the assistant supervisor who rarely spoke, stepped in. "Rick, that's not fair. Eli's been doing double the work of most guys here." Rick turned on him. "You want to join him?" Mateo, standing nearby, added, "He didn't do anything wrong. You're just covering your own mistake." One by one, others stopped what they were doing, watching the confrontation unfold. The tension snapped like a taut wire. Elliot took a step forward. "You want me gone? Fine." He reached up and pulled off his dusty cap. "But you should know who you're really firing." He straightened his posture. "My name's Elliot Granger. I own this club." Rick's face went pale. Silence swept over the group. Cam's eyes widened. Mateo's jaw dropped. "I've spent the last week working beside all of you," Elliot said, "and what I've seen is unacceptable. Unsafe conditions, manipulative leadership, people terrified of speaking up." Rick stammered. This is a misunderstanding." "No," Elliot interrupted, voice firm. "The only misunderstanding was thinking you could treat people this way and never be held accountable. You're done here." As the dust from the confrontation settled, Elliot stood at the edge of the maintenance shed, his presence now fully unveiled. Gone was Eli, the quiet new hire with dirt-streaked boots and a borrowed rake. In his place stood Elliot Granger, owner of Granger Greens Golf Club. Face calm but voice edged with authority, the staff, still stunned from the reveal, slowly gathered around, unsure what to expect. Some looked away, worried about what this meant for their jobs. Others stared, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Elliot wasn't here to lecture. He was here to fix what he had allowed to rot in his absence. "I came here undercover because I stopped recognizing the place this club had become," he said, voice steady. "My vision was never about prestige or pleasing elite members at the expense of good people. It was about community, fairness, and creating a place where people enjoyed coming to work." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of Cam, Mateo, and Lisa, the groundskeeper who had spent every morning silently tending the flower beds no one noticed. What I found instead was fear, overworked staff, unsafe practices, and a manager more concerned with optics than with truth. He turned to Rick, who stood frozen by the lockers, pale and trembling. "You blamed others for your mistakes. You ignored injuries. You cut hours to control your team instead of leading them." Elliot's voice never rose, but it didn't need to. Every word hit like a cleanly struck tee shot. "You're terminated, effective immediately." Gasps echoed through the group. Cam exhaled audibly, and Lisa blinked as if unsure whether she'd heard right. Rick tried to defend himself, mumbled something about expectations and numbers, but Elliot didn't flinch. "Save it. You had your chance to lead with integrity." Then, shifting his focus back to the crew, Elliot continued. There will be no retaliation for what was said here today. In fact, I'm here to listen, to really listen. Starting now, we're rebuilding from the ground up. The weight in the room began to lift, replaced by something unfamiliar, cautious optimism. Elliot had revealed more than just his identity. He had exposed the truth, and with it, a promise. Things were going to change. For real this time. Elliot didn't return to his office after the confrontation. He stayed on the grounds, clipboard in hand, and called an impromptu meeting beneath the shaded overhang near the practice green. One by one, the maintenance crew, front desk staff, and course marshals gathered, still unsure what to expect from the man who had just fired their manager in front of everyone. This isn't just about Rick, Elliot began. It's about what's been allowed to happen here for far too long. I want to hear your experiences, directly, honestly, and without fear. At first, silence clung to the group like morning dew, but then Lisa, the groundskeeper with calloused hands and a guarded expression, stepped forward. It's not just the hours or the busted mowers. It's the way we're treated, like background noise, like, we don't matter. That opened the floodgates. Mateo talked about tools that had been broken for months, forcing them to improvise and risk injury. Cam spoke up about shift favoritism and how voicing concerns meant being labeled difficult. A younger staffer described working double shifts in the heat without water breaks, and an older cart attendant revealed that his medical requests had been ignored altogether. Elliot listened, jotting down every word. He didn't interrupt, he didn't defend, he just absorbed the weight of it all. When they were finished, Elliot looked at them with quiet resolve. Thank you for your honesty and for staying, even when it would have been easier to walk away. Starting today, your voices are part of every decision. We're creating a rotating employee council, fixing the equipment backlog, and bringing in HR for a full review. And no more retaliation. Ever. For the first time in a long while, the workers didn't look defeated. They looked like they were being seen, and Elliot knew listening was only the beginning, but it was the right place to start. The very next morning, Elliot arrived at Ridgeway Golf Club before sunrise, clipboard in hand and determination in his stride. He called an early staff meeting, this time in the clubhouse lounge, and unveiled a list of immediate reforms. First, all scheduled maintenance issues, broken sprinklers, worn-out mowers, malfunctioning carts, would be addressed by a contracted repair team arriving later that day. No more workarounds, no more risks, he told them. Second, the punishing rotating shifts were officially over. Everyone would receive stable schedules with guaranteed breaks and fair hours, tailored to avoid burnout. You should never have to choose between your health and your paycheck, he said, meeting each worker's gaze. But the changes weren't just logistical, they were personal. Elliot singled out employees who had quietly kept the club afloat during its most dysfunctional period. Lisa, who had spoken up first the day before, was promoted to groundskeeping lead, a role that had gone unfilled for years. You already lead out there. It's time your title reflects that, he said, handing her the new badge. Mateo was given a full-time maintenance role with benefits, and Cam, once labeled a complainer, was invited to help design the new employee feedback system. As the announcements rolled on, something shifted tangibly in the room. Disbelief gave way to cautious smiles. For the first time in months, the staff felt seen, heard, and valued. These changes aren't temporary, Elliot assured them. They're the foundation of what Ridgeway is becoming, a place where people matter as much as the guests we serve. Applause was hesitant at first, then built into genuine claps and nods of agreement. Elliot stepped back and watched the moment unfold. It wasn't about grand speeches or flashy gestures. It was about dignity restored, and in that quiet transformation he knew the real work had finally begun. Restoring the culture at Ridgeway Golf Club didn't happen overnight, but Elliot was committed to making every step count. In the weeks following the reforms, he remained visible on the grounds, not as a CEO barking orders, but as a teammate listening, learning, and showing up. He introduced weekly green talks, informal gatherings where staff could share concerns, ideas, or even just stories from the course, over coffee and pastries. These moments built trust, especially among employees who had previously kept their heads down out of fear. Lisa, now groundskeeping lead, took initiative by organizing small team-building sessions before each morning shift. Mateo helped restructure maintenance logs so no issue would be ignored or delayed again. Even Cam, once brushed off as a troublemaker, became a respected voice in shaping the new employee handbook. Elliot also made sure the physical space reflected the new values. Break areas were upgraded, new equipment was ordered, and a recognition board titled Unsung Heroes was installed in the clubhouse hallway. Members began to notice too, not just the cleaner greens, but the brighter mood in the staff. "Feels like a different place," one longtime guest remarked. And it was. Ridgeway was no longer a club running on silence and survival. It was becoming a place of pride and mutual respect. By choosing to lead with presence and principle, Elliot didn't just fix a broken system, he reignited a culture where every worker, from greenskeeper to golf cart attendant, knew they belonged and mattered. As Elliot Walker stood at the edge of the 18th green, watching the early morning sun rise over Ridgeway Golf Club, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Just weeks ago, this same spot had symbolized distance between management and staff, between profit and purpose. Now, laughter drifted from the maintenance shed. Cam was training a new groundskeeper with quiet confidence, and Lisa coordinated the morning crew with calm authority. The transformation hadn't come from a press release or a boardroom policy. It came from getting his boots muddy, hearing the unspoken frustrations, and taking action where others had turned a blind eye. Elliot had built Ridgeway to honor his father's legacy of hard work and integrity, but somewhere along the way, efficiency had replaced empathy. Going undercover didn't just show him what was broken, it reminded him of what mattered. Real leadership wasn't measured in tee times booked or accolades won, but in the strength of the people behind the scenes. In the past, he'd assumed good intentions were enough. Now he knew better. Accountability had to be active, not assumed. Looking across the course, he saw more than trimmed fairways and smooth greens. He saw people reclaiming pride in their work, a culture rebuilt on fairness, and a future worth investing in. Ridgeway Golf Club had become what it was always meant to be, not just a destination, but a community. And Elliot, humbled and reawakened, was ready to lead it, this time, the right way. The story of Elliot Walker and Ridgeway Golf Club offers a powerful lesson in leadership, accountability, and the importance of staying connected to the people who keep an organization running. Elliot had built his business on values of integrity and hard work, but over time, distance and delegation allowed a toxic culture to take root beneath the surface. It wasn't until he stepped out of the boardroom and into the lives of his employees, undercover and unnoticed, that he saw the full extent of the damage, mistreatment, fear, and burnout. Through his experience, Elliot learned that leadership isn't about giving orders from above. It's about listening, showing up, and being willing to get your hands dirty for the sake of those around you. By witnessing the quiet resilience of workers like Cam and Lisa, he was reminded that empathy and fairness are not optional, they're essential. The biggest takeaway: culture doesn't change with a memo. It changes when leaders take responsibility, invite honesty, and back up their promises with action. When Elliot chose transparency over tradition and compassion over convenience, the entire organization began to heal. The story proves that real strength in leadership lies in humility, and that it's never too late to rebuild trust from the ground up.